November 14th, 1994. Riverside County, Pennsylvania. A yellow school bus carrying 20 students pulled away from Lincoln Middle School at exactly 2:47 p.m. It was a Tuesday. The sky was gray, threatening rain. Autumn leaves scattered across wet pavement as the bus turned onto Maple Street, beginning its familiar route through the quiet neighborhoods of this small mill town. By 4:15 p.m., not a single child had arrived home. By 5:30 p.m., police helicopters circled the woods where the bus was last seen entering. Search dogs picked up nothing. Volunteers combed through dense forest, calling out names that would never answer back. The bus had simply vanished. 20 children, one driver, gone without a trace. For 30 years, investigators had nothing. No crash site, no ransom demands, no witnesses, no bodies. The case went cold. Families moved away or learned to live with the unbearable weight of not knowing. Riverside became known as the town that lost its children, the kind of place people whispered about, then forgot. Until October 3rd, 2024, when heavy rains caused a sinkhole to open in Miller's Woods. A hiker stumbled into the collapsing earth and saw something impossible beneath the mud. Something yellow. Something metal. Something that had been buried 12 feet underground for 3 decades. It was the bus. Inside were 19 skeletal remains, most still strapped in their seats. Backpacks still on their shoulders. Lunch boxes rusted shut. Textbooks dissolved into pulp. And in the driver's seat, slumped forward over the wheel, the remains of Margaret Chen, the 54-year-old woman who'd driven Route 7 for 12 years without a single complaint. But one seat was empty. Seat 17. Front right side. No body. No bones. No explanation. What investigators found instead was a leather journal, wedged behind the seat cushion, water damaged, but miraculously intact. 400 pages of careful handwriting. Daily observations. Growing dread. And a final entry that ended mid-sentence. The page stained with blood. The journal belonged to 14-year-old Jamie Reese, the student who sat in seat 17. The student who documented everything. The student who somehow, impossibly, escaped. This is the story of what happened on Route 7. The conspiracy that buried 20 children alive. And the girl who survived to tell the truth. If cases like this fascinate you, stories where the truth is darker than anyone imagined, where one person's courage brings justice decades later, then you need to subscribe to Ultimate Crime Stories. We bring you the most compelling true crime cases, told with the depth and detail they deserve. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. Now, let's get back to Route 7. November 14th, 1994 started like any other Tuesday in Riverside County. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you walk faster. Children trudged to school with backpacks too heavy, breath visible in the early light. Parents kissed foreheads and reminded their kids to call when they got home. Lincoln Middle School sat at the edge of town, a 3-story brick building that had educated generations of Riverside children since 1952. That morning, the hallways smelled like floor wax and cafeteria food. Lockers slammed. Teachers called for quiet. Everything was perfectly, beautifully ordinary. Margaret Chen arrived at the school at 2:30 p.m., like she did every weekday. She'd been a bus driver for 12 years, ever since her divorce left her needing steady work, and her daughter's medical bills left her drowning in debt. Maggie, as everyone called her, was known for her kindness. She remembered birthdays. She mediated disputes between kids who fought over seats. She kept a box of granola bars in the front of the bus for students who came to school hungry. But that fall, something had changed. Other drivers noticed it. Maggie's hands shook when she held the steering wheel. Her eyes looked tired, haunted. She'd lost weight. When asked if everything was okay, she'd smile and say she was fine, just fine, but the smile never reached her eyes. At 2:47 p.m., 20 students boarded bus number 7. Tommy Breslin, 13 years old, basketball player, loud and confident, took his usual spot in the back row. The Cordero twins, Maya and Marcus, 10 years old and inseparable, sat together in the middle. sharing earbuds connected to a Discman. Sarah Vance, 11, shy and bookish, settled into her window seat with a copy of Bridge to Terabithia. There were 17 others, children aged 7 to 14. Some were friends. Some were siblings. Some barely knew each other. And in seat 17, front right side, sat Jamie Reese. Jamie was 14, quiet, observant in a way that made adults uncomfortable. She noticed things. The way Ms. Chen's hands trembled. The dark circles under Mr. Patterson's eyes in English class. The way certain students flinched when voices were raised. Jamie noticed everything, and she wrote it all down in a leather journal her grandmother had given her for her 13th birthday. Use it to remember, her grandmother had said. Memory is the only thing they can't take from you. Jamie opened her journal as the bus pulled away from Lincoln Middle School. At the top of the page, she wrote, Route 7, day 847. Something feels different today. The bus made its way through Riverside's residential streets, past the elementary school, past the grocery store where Jamie's mom worked checkout, past the park where the swings hung motionless in the cold November air. 4 students got off at Maple Street. 16 remained. At 3:29 p.m., the bus entered Miller's Woods. Miller's Woods was a stretch of dense forest that separated the main part of Riverside from the rural properties on the eastern edge of town. The shortcut through the woods saved 10 minutes. Maggie Chen had taken it every day for 12 years. The road was paved, well-maintained, straight as an arrow. There was no reason for anything to go wrong. But Jamie noticed that Maggie's hands were gripping the steering wheel, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She noticed that Maggie kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, not at the students, but at something behind them. And she noticed, just before they entered the tree line, that Maggie whispered something that sounded like, "I'm sorry." At 3:31 p.m., bus number 7 entered Miller's Woods. At 3:47 p.m., Linda Breslin called Lincoln Middle School to ask why her son Tommy wasn't home yet. By 4:15 p.m., 12 parents had called. By 4:45 p.m., police were dispatched. By 5:30 p.m., the first search helicopter was in the air. The road through Miller's Woods was only 1.2 miles long. It was a straight shot, no turns, no intersections. There were no side roads where a bus could have turned off. There were no cliffs, no rivers, no hazards of any kind. But somewhere in that 1.2 miles, bus number 7 ceased to exist. Search teams found nothing. No tire tracks leaving the main road. No skid marks suggesting a crash. No broken branches indicating the bus had veered into the forest. The dogs picked up no scent trail. The thermal imaging detected no heat signatures. It was as if the bus had simply evaporated, taking 20 children and their driver with it. The FBI arrived within 48 hours. They brought cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic specialists. They interviewed every student at Lincoln Middle School, every teacher, every parent, every resident who lived near Miller's Woods. They examined Maggie Chen's background, her finances, her phone records. They found nothing suspicious. Maggie Chen was a woman with no criminal record, no history of mental illness, no motive to harm anyone. The investigation continued for months. Volunteers searched every inch of Miller's Woods on foot. Divers checked the quarry ponds 3 miles away. Psychics offered their services. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some said it was a government cover-up. Others claimed alien abduction. Desperate parents grasped at anything that might bring their children home. By 1995, the leads had dried up. By 2001, the 20 students and their driver were officially declared dead, presumed victims of an unknown tragedy. By 2010, most of the families had moved away, unable to live in the town that reminded them of what they'd lost. Riverside became a ghost town in more ways than one. The elementary school closed due to declining enrollment. Main Street storefronts went dark. Those who remained didn't talk about Route 7. It was easier to forget, easier to move on. But some wounds don't heal. Some questions don't fade. And some secrets don't stay buried forever. October 3rd, 2024. 30 years, nearly to the day. Robert Mitchell was hiking through Miller's woods when the ground beneath his feet began to sink. Heavy October rains had saturated the soil, and what had been solid earth for decades suddenly wasn't. Robert felt the ground shift, heard a crack like breaking ice, and then he was falling, his leg plunging through soft dirt into empty space below. He caught himself on the edge, heart pounding, and that's when he looked down into the hole his leg had made. In the darkness below, illuminated by filtered sunlight, he saw something that shouldn't be there. Something metallic. Something yellow. Robert called 911. Within an hour, emergency services had arrived. Within 2 hours, ground-penetrating radar had been deployed. Within 4 hours, they knew what they'd found. A bus. Buried 12 feet underground. Perfectly vertical. Nose pointing down into the earth like a tombstone. The excavation took 3 days. Heavy machinery carefully removed tons of soil, while forensic teams documented every layer. News crews arrived from Philadelphia, from New York, from across the country. The story that had haunted America for 3 decades was suddenly front-page news again. On October 6th, they breached the bus. The forensic team entered through the emergency exit on the roof, which was now at ground level due to the vertical burial. They wore hazmat suits and carried cameras that transmitted live footage to monitors outside. What they found inside would become one of the most haunting crime scenes in American history. 19 skeletal remains. Most were still seated, seat belts fastened. The process of decomposition had been slowed by the sealed environment and the clay-rich soil. Backpacks were still on shoulders. Textbooks, reduced to pulp but still recognizable, lay on laps. One small skull had rolled into the aisle, but most remained in place, as if the children were simply waiting for their stop. In the driver's seat, Margaret Chen's remains were slumped forward over the steering wheel. Her hands were still positioned, as if gripping it. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the off position. The windows were intact. The door was closed. There were no signs of impact, no indications of a crash or struggle. The bus had been lowered into a pre-dug pit and buried deliberately, carefully, with the precision of a planned operation. But it was seat 17 that drew the most attention. The seat was empty. No skeletal remains. No decomposed tissue. Nothing. The forensic team photographed it from every angle, took soil samples, analyzed every fiber. And that's when they found the journal. It was wedged behind the seat cushion, wrapped in what appeared to be a plastic bag that had partially degraded. The leather cover was water-stained, but intact. Inside, 412 pages of careful handwriting. Some pages were illegible, destroyed by moisture. But most had survived. On the inside cover, written in blue ink, property of Jamie Reese. If found, please return. This is important. The journal was immediately transferred to the FBI laboratory in Philadelphia. Forensic document examiners worked carefully to preserve and digitize every page. As they read, the scope of what had happened began to emerge. Jamie Reese hadn't just been keeping a diary. She'd been documenting a conspiracy. The journal began innocuously enough. January 3rd, 1994. Jamie's first entry of the new year. New year, new journal. Grandma says writing things down helps you see patterns. I'm not sure what patterns I'm supposed to see in 8th grade, but I'll try. The early entries were typical teenage observations. Complaints about homework. Descriptions of classmates. Worries about fitting in. But even in those early pages, Jamie's unusual perceptiveness was evident. She noticed when teachers seemed distracted. She picked up on tensions between students that others missed. She saw the world with unusual clarity. March 3rd, 1994. Tommy said he saw Ms. Chen talking to a man in a black car after school yesterday. She looked upset. When Tommy asked her about it, she said it was her brother. But Ms. Chen doesn't have a brother. I know because she mentioned once that she was an only child. So who was the man? And why did she lie? April 12, 1994. Mom signed me up for tutoring with Dr. Foster. She says I'm too withdrawn and need to be more engaged with my peer group. I don't think I'm withdrawn. I just don't see the point in talking when I don't have anything to say. First session is next Tuesday. The tutoring sessions with Dr. Raymond Foster became a recurring theme in Jamie's journal. Foster ran the Riverside Center for Youth Development out of a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of town. He advertised his services as academic tutoring and social skills development for children who were struggling in school or having difficulty making friends. April 19, 1994. First session with Dr. Foster. He didn't ask about my grades or my homework. He asked about fear. What makes me afraid? What makes me uncomfortable? Would I tell my parents if something bad happened to me? When I asked why these questions mattered for tutoring, he said he needed to understand my baseline psychological state. He takes notes in a black binder with my name on it. I can see other names on the shelf behind him. I recognize some of them. They're all kids who ride my bus. May 3rd, 1994. There are 12 kids in Dr. Foster's program now. I counted. Tommy Breslin, the Cordero twins, Sarah Vance, 8 others. All of them ride bus 7. That can't be a coincidence. When I mentioned it to Dr. Foster, he smiled and said he often works with students from the same school because word of mouth is his best advertising. But that's not how it works. None of us recommended him. Our parents just decided to sign us up around the same time. Jamie's entries about the tutoring sessions grew increasingly uneasy. Dr. Foster's questions became more invasive. He asked about family dynamics, about trust, about what would happen if the children disappeared. He showed them videos, psychological tests, that measured their responses to stress and fear. June 15, 1994. Dr. Foster showed us a video today. It was just static and white noise, but he made us watch it for 20 minutes. Some of the other kids fell asleep. I didn't. When it was over, he asked how he felt. Most kids said tired or bored. I said I felt like something was trying to get into my head. He wrote that down and looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You're very perceptive, Jamie. Perhaps too perceptive." July 8, 1994, last session before summer break. Dr. Foster told me I was graduating from his program. He said I was ready for the next phase of development. I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see. It's a journey you'll never forget." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The summer entries focused on normal teenage activities. Swimming at the community pool. Movies with friends. Complaints about the heat. But when September arrived and school resumed, Jamie's observations took on a darker tone. September 7th, 1994. First day back. Ms. Chen looks different. Tired. Scared almost. Her hands shake when she holds the steering wheel. I heard her crying in the parking lot after all of us got off the bus. She was on her phone saying, "I can't do this anymore. They're just children." When she saw me watching, she hung up immediately and drove away fast. September 22nd, 1994. We've been taking a different route home. Ms. Chun says it's faster, but it's not. I timed it. Last year it took 17 minutes to get from school to my stop. Now it takes 29 minutes. We go through Miller's Woods, which we never used to do. When I asked Ms. Chun why we changed routes, she said the school district mandated it. But none of the other buses changed routes. Only ours. October 8th, 1994. There's a van that follows us sometimes. Dark blue. No windows in the back. It stays far behind, but I notice it because I'm always looking. It's been following us for 2 weeks. Today, it followed us all the way to the edge of Miller's Woods, then turned off. I mentioned it to Tommy. He said I was being paranoid. Maybe I am. October 30th, 1994. Ms. Chen asked me to stay after everyone else got off today. She looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, "Jamie, you're observant. Too observant. If anything ever happens that doesn't feel right, promise me you'll run. Don't ask questions. Don't try to help. Just run and don't look back." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. She just started crying. November 11th, 1994. I saw Ms. Chun on her phone during lunch. She was sitting in her bus in the parking lot. She didn't know I could see her from the library window. She was crying and saying, "I won't do it. I don't care what you do to me. I won't hurt these children. Then she saw me watching. She looked terrified. Not of me. For me. November 13th, 1994. Tomorrow is Monday. Something is going to happen. I don't know what, but I can feel it. The van has been following us every day this week. Ms. Chen's hands shake so badly she can barely shift gears. Today she looked at me in the rearview mirror and mouthed the word sorry. I'm carrying my journal with me everywhere now. If something happens, maybe someone will find this and understand. And then, the final entry. November 14th, 1994. It's happening. Right now. 3:33 p.m. We just entered Miller's Woods. But Ms. Chen didn't follow the normal route. She turned onto Old Quarry Road. We never go this way. I can see tears running down her face. She's whispering something over and over. It sounds like forgive me. The blue van is ahead of us now, not behind, leading us somewhere. Tommy just asked where we're going. Ms. Chen won't answer. Sarah is crying. The twins are holding hands. We're stopping. Middle of nowhere. Dense trees on both sides. The van stopped too. 3 men are getting out. They're wearing masks. Medical masks. Surgical gloves. Ms. Chun just turned around in her seat. She's looking at all of us. She said, I'm so sorry. Please know I never wanted this. Please forgive me. The bus door is opening. The men are boarding. They have something in their hands. Syringes. They're moving down the aisle. Kids are screaming. Tommy tried to run, but one of the men grabbed him, stuck the needle in his neck. Tommy fell down. They're sedating everyone. One by one. The Cordero twins. Sarah. Everyone. One of them is walking toward me now. He's looking right at me. I'm in seat 17. Front right. He's reaching for me. I can see his eyes through the mask. They're cold. Empty. He's saying something. This one's the observer. The one Foster warned us about. His hand is on my shoulder. I can feel the needle against my neck. It's cold. Sharp. I'm going to. The entry ended abruptly. The rest of the page was blank except for a rust-brown stain. Blood. Jamie's blood. But unlike the 19 other children, Jamie Reese's body was never found in that bus. When the FBI laboratory finished analyzing Jamie's journal, they knew they needed someone who understood this case. Not just the facts, but the weight of it. The 3-decade history. The families who'd never stopped grieving. They called Sarah Keller. Keller was 56 years old, a former FBI child abduction specialist, who'd worked the original Route 7 case in 1994 as a junior agent. She'd been 26 then, fresh out of Quantico, assigned to assist the senior agents. She'd interviewed parents, searched the woods, analyzed evidence that led nowhere. And when the case went cold, it had haunted her. For 30 years, Route 7 was the case she couldn't solve, the children she couldn't save. Now retired and running a cold case consultation firm from her home in Montana, Keller received the call from Riverside County Sheriff's Department on October 7, 2024. We found them, the sheriff said simply. We found the bus. We found the children. And we found something else. A journal. We need you to come back. Keller arrived in Riverside on October 9th. The town looked smaller than she remembered, more worn down. Main Street had more empty storefronts than occupied ones. The population had declined from 8,000 in 1994 to just over 4,000 now. The elementary school was closed. The park where children used to play sat empty and overgrown. But the grief was still fresh. Everywhere Keller looked, she saw memorial posters, flowers, photographs of children who'd never grown up. The town had been frozen in 1994, unable to move forward, unable to forget. Keller spent her first day at the excavation site. She stood at the edge of the pit where the bus had been removed, looking down into the hole that had hidden the truth for 30 years. The soil was red clay, dense and heavy. Someone had dug this pit with industrial equipment. Someone had lowered a 35-foot bus into it, perfectly vertical. Someone had filled it in with tons of earth and covered it so well that no one found it for 3 decades. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This was planned, organized. executed with precision. On her second day, Keller read Jamie's journal. She read it 3 times, front to back, making notes, highlighting patterns. By the time she finished, she understood 3 things with absolute certainty. First, the children weren't kidnapped by a stranger. They were delivered by someone they trusted. Margaret Chen hadn't taken them somewhere random. She'd taken them to a specific location, following specific instructions, meeting specific people. Second, this wasn't about ransom or exploitation. The children were sedated, placed back on the bus, and buried alive. Why? What purpose did that serve? Third, Jamie Reese had seen everything. She'd documented the conspiracy for months. She tried to warn people in the only way she knew how. And somehow, despite being sedated along with everyone else, she'd escaped. Keller's first priority was finding out who Dr. Raymond Foster really was. The Riverside Center for Youth Development had closed in 1995, shortly after the disappearance. The property had been sold and converted into a private residence. Foster himself had left town, leaving no forwarding address. But Keller had resources now that hadn't existed in 1994. She had digital databases, social media, facial recognition technology. Within 2 days, she'd found him. Dr. Raymond Foster was living in a retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona, under his real name. He was 79 years old, presenting himself as a retired educational consultant, spending his days playing golf and attending community lectures. Keller flew to Arizona on October 12th. She found Foster in the community's library, reading a newspaper in a leather armchair. He was thin, elegant, with white hair and the kind of face that looked trustworthy, grandfatherly, harmless. "Dr. Foster," Keller said, showing her identification. "I'm Sarah Keller. I need to speak with you about Riverside, Pennsylvania." Foster's expression didn't change. He carefully folded his newspaper, set it aside, and looked at her with calm, intelligent eyes. "I wondered when someone would come," he said quietly. 30 years. I rather thought I'd gotten away with it." Keller felt her pulse quicken. She'd expected denials, lawyers, stonewalling. She hadn't expected a confession. Gotten away with what, Dr. Foster? "The most important psychological study of the 20th century," he said simply. "The study of terminal awareness in adolescent subjects. How does the developing mind cope with the certainty of death? What defense mechanisms emerge? How does consciousness persist or fail to persist in the final moments?" Keller's stomach turned. "You buried 20 children alive to study them." "I buried 19, Foster corrected. "One escaped, though I'll confess I still don't understand how. The sedation should have been absolute." Jamie Reese. "Ah yes, the observer. The one who wrote everything down." Foster smiled slightly. "I chose subjects carefully, Detective. Children who were isolated, perceptive, prone to anxiety. Perfect candidates for studying stress response. But Miss Reese was perhaps too perceptive. She noticed patterns I'd hoped would remain invisible." "Where are the observation records?" Keller asked. "You said you were studying them. You must have had equipment, cameras, some way of monitoring what happened in that bus." Foster's smile widened. "Now that would be telling. But yes, I documented everything. The subjects were fitted with basic monitoring equipment before sedation. Heart rate, brain activity. The bus itself was equipped with sensors. I watched them die, Detective. Every single one. It was extraordinary." Keller forced herself to remain calm. "Margaret Chen. She was coerced. Ms. Chen was compensated generously for her participation. She had debts. Medical expenses from her daughter's accident. I offered a solution, and she accepted. She tried to back out. The journal mentions. Yes, she developed an inconvenient conscience. But by then, the arrangements were made. The pit was dug. The equipment was installed. She fulfilled her obligation." Foster paused. "She was sedated along with the children, if that brings you any comfort. She didn't suffer." "Where are the observation records?" Keller repeated. "Destroyed." "I'm not foolish, Detective. The study is complete. The data is documented in my research, which will be published posthumously. But the raw footage, the monitoring equipment, all of it was disposed of years ago. Keller stood. Dr. Raymond Foster, you're under arrest for 19 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. Foster didn't resist. As officers led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at Keller and said calmly, "You'll never find her, you know. Jamie Reese. If she survived that day, she's been hiding for 30 years. People who hide that long don't want to be found." But Foster was wrong, because Jamie Reese had left a trail. Not an obvious one. Not the kind of trail that investigators in 1994 could have followed. But it was there, waiting for someone who knew how to look. Keller returned to Riverside and began the painstaking work of reconstructing what happened after Jamie escaped the bus. The forensic evidence told part of the story. The window next to seat 17 had been broken from the inside. There were scratches on the frame, fingernail marks, suggesting Jamie had clawed her way through even while sedated. Blood spatter analysis indicated she'd been injured, likely a head wound from the initial needle stick or the struggle that followed. But she'd gotten out. Sometime between 3:40 p.m. and 4 p.m. on November 14, 1994, while the three men were occupied sedating the other children, Jamie had broken the window and escaped into Miller's Woods. Keller organized a new search of the area surrounding the burial site. Using metal detectors and cadaver dogs, her team found something 200 yards northeast of where the bus had been buried. A small piece of torn fabric, preserved in the clay soil. It matched the jacket Jamie had been wearing in her school photo. The trail led northeast, away from the main road, deeper into the woods. After 3 miles, the forest gave way to scattered rural properties. Keller obtained property records from 1994 and began contacting residents who'd lived in the area 30 years ago. Most had moved away or passed on. But on October 18th, she found Carol and Dennis Hart, now in their 70s, living in a retirement community in Maryland. "We remember," Carol said quietly when Keller explained why she'd come. "November 18th, 1994. Dennis found a girl in our shed. She was unconscious, badly injured. We called an ambulance immediately." "What happened to her?" Keller asked. "They took her to Riverside General. We visited her in the hospital a few times, but she wouldn't speak. Wouldn't tell anyone her name. Just drew pictures over and over. A bus. Trees. People with no faces." "Did she say anything? Anything at all?" Dennis nodded slowly. "Once. A nurse was trying to get her to eat, and the girl looked up and whispered, 'They're still in the ground.' The nurse thought she was delirious from the head injury." "Where did she go after the hospital?" "State custody," Carol said. "No family came forward. No one claimed her. She became a Jane Doe. We tried to follow up, but the system, you know how it is. She disappeared into it." Keller spent the next 2 days tracking Jane Doe RV 94 through Pennsylvania's social services records. The trail led to a state psychiatric facility where the girl, estimated age 14, had been held from December 1994 until her 18th birthday in 1998. The psychiatric records were sealed, but Keller obtained a court order. What she found was heartbreaking. The girl had never spoken. Not in 4 years. She'd been diagnosed with selective mutism, severe PTSD, and dissociative disorder. She drew compulsively. The same images over and over. A bus. Trees. 19 faces. She'd covered the walls of her room with drawings. One psychiatrist's note stood out. Patient exhibits extreme distress when unable to access writing materials. When provided with paper and pencil, patient fills pages with names. 20 names, written repeatedly. Tommy Breslin, Maya Cordero, Marcus Cordero, Sarah Vance. 16 others. Patient also writes one phrase repeatedly. "I remember them all." On her 18th birthday, Jane Doe had been released into an independent living program. The last address on file was a group home in Philadelphia. After that, the trail went cold. Keller had one advantage that investigators in 1994 hadn't possessed: DNA. The blood on the journal page had been preserved well enough for analysis. She now had Jamie Reese's DNA profile. She ran it through every database available. Cody's, missing persons, Unidentified remains. Nothing. And then, on October 23rd, she got a hit from an unexpected source, a voluntary DNA ancestry database. Someone had uploaded their genetic profile 2 years ago, in 2022, connected to a user account with the name Observer17. Keller's hands trembled as she opened the account's limited public information. No photos. No real name. But there was a location, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And there was a message in the profile description. I am the person who remembered. Keller sent a message through the platform. My name is Sarah Keller. I'm investigating Route 7. I found your journal. I need to speak with you. She didn't expect a response. But 3 hours later, her phone buzzed with a notification. Limestone Coffee. 3rd and Market. Philadelphia. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. October 24th, 2024. Sarah Keller sat in a corner booth at Limestone Coffee in Philadelphia, watching the door. It was 1:55 p.m. Rain streaked the windows. The cafe smelled like espresso and cinnamon. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman entered. She was 44 years old, thin, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans, a dark jacket, and moved with the careful awareness of someone who'd spent decades looking over her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the cafe, cataloging exits, assessing threats, before settling on Keller. She walked to the booth and sat down without saying hello. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. You found them, the woman said finally. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but Keller could hear the emotion underneath. Yes, all 19. And the driver? Margaret Chen. She was with them. The woman nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd always known. She didn't want to do it. They forced her. I heard her crying. You're Jamie Reese. I was. She smiled slightly sadly. I'm not sure what I am now. Why didn't you come forward? After you escaped after. I tried, Jamie interrupted. I woke up in a hospital and told them about the bus, about the men, about Dr. Foster. They said I was confused from the head trauma. Delusional. When I kept insisting, they moved me to a psychiatric facility. I spent 4 years there being told that my memories weren't real. So you stopped talking. I stopped talking, but I never stopped remembering. I drew them, wrote their names, every single day for 4 years. Because if I forgot, then they really would be gone. Keller leaned forward. Jamie, I need you to tell me everything. From the moment you broke that window. Jamie closed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was distant, reliving a memory 3 decades old. The sedative made everything slow and heavy. I remember the needle, the cold feeling spreading through my body. I could hear the other kids falling unconscious around me. But something in me wouldn't let go. Ms. Chen had told me to run, so I fought it. I broke the window with my elbow. Didn't even feel the pain. Didn't feel the glass cutting my arms. I just pushed through and fell onto the ground outside. I could hear the men shouting. One of them came to the window, but I was already running. The woods were so dark, dense. I kept falling. My vision was blurring, but I ran. I don't know how long. Time stopped making sense. I remember thinking I had to tell someone, had to get help, had to save them. But then I fell, and I couldn't get up. I crawled under something, a shed or a building. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. And when I tried to tell them what happened, no one believed me. They said I was confused. That there was no missing bus, no missing children. They showed me newspapers. Nothing. No story. No search. Like it never happened. I thought I was going crazy. Thought maybe the drugs had made me imagine everything. But I had my journal. I'd managed to hold on to it when I ran. It was proof. So I showed it to a doctor. They took it away. Said it was evidence of my delusion. That I'd made up an elaborate story and written it down. They prescribed medication. Therapy. And when I kept insisting it was real, they committed me. Jamie opened her eyes, and Keller saw tears there. For 4 years, I lived in that facility, and the whole time, my friends were in the ground. I knew where they were. I tried to tell people, but no one would listen. What happened when you turned 18? They released me, gave me a voucher for the group home, some pamphlets about managing my condition. I was free. And the first thing I did was go back to Riverside. Back to Miller's Woods. I searched for months. Every day. Looking for anything. Any sign. But I couldn't find them. The woods were huge, and I didn't know exactly where. So I did the only thing I could do. I watched. I waited. I documented everything. I wrote down every detail I could remember over and over, because I was terrified I'd forget. And I watched Dr. Foster. Found out where he'd moved. Kept tabs on him. Waiting for him to slip up, to reveal where they were. But he never did. Why didn't you go to the police after you were released? Jamie laughed bitterly. Because I'd spent 4 years in a psychiatric hospital with delusional disorder on my record. Who would believe me? I was a girl who'd made up an elaborate story about missing children that everyone knew never existed. Going to the police would have just gotten me committed again. So you lived with it for 30 years. I survived with it, Jamie corrected. There's a difference. I got a job, found a place to live, went through the motions. But I never forgot, never stopped looking. And when that sinkhole opened up and the news reported they'd found a bus, her voice broke. I knew. Finally, someone would believe me. Keller reached across the table and took Jamie's hand. I believe you. I've always believed something happened. And now we have proof. Dr. Foster has been arrested. He confessed to everything. Jamie's head snapped up. He confessed. Everything. The conspiracy, the study, the murders. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. For a long moment, Jamie didn't speak. Then she started crying. 30 years of held grief pouring out. They were my friends, she whispered. Tommy and Sarah and the twins. They were just kids. They deserved to go home. They deserved to grow up. Because of you, they came home, Keller said gently. Because you wrote it down. Because you remembered. Because you survived. November 14th, 2024. Exactly 30 years after Route 7 vanished. A memorial stood in Miller's Woods now, at the site where the bus had been buried. 19 names carved into black granite. 19 photographs of children who never came home. 19 families finally able to bury their loved ones with dignity. Jamie Reese stood before the memorial, holding 19 white roses. One by one, she placed them at the base of a stone, saying each name aloud. Tommy Breslin, Maya Cordero, Marcus Cordero, Sarah Vance. All 19 names. Spoken with love, with memory, with the promise that they would never be forgotten. Behind her, Sarah Keller watched silently. The case was closed. Dr. Raymond Foster would die in prison. The families had answers. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But some wounds never fully heal. Jamie knelt before the memorial and opened a new journal. On the first page, she wrote, November 14th, 2024. 30 years later, they came home. Finally, they came home. And I kept my promise. I remember them all. She stood, touched the stone one last time, and walked away. But she wasn't walking away from them. She was walking forward, carrying their memory with her, as she'd done for 30 years. Because some things are worth remembering. Some stories demand to be told. And some survivors spend their entire lives ensuring that the dead are not forgotten. This was the story of Route 7. 20 students who got on a bus and never came home. 19 who died in darkness. And one who survived to bear witness. Her name was Jamie Reese. And she remembered everything. Dr. Raymond Foster died in prison in 2025 while awaiting appeal. He never revealed the location of his observation equipment or research data. Margaret Chen was posthumously exonerated. A memorial scholarship in her name now supports children of families affected by trauma. The 19 victims of Route 7 were laid to rest in a special section of Riverside Memorial Cemetery, together as they were that day. Jamie Reese continues to live in Philadelphia. She works with trauma survivors and advocates for believed children in the justice system. The Riverside Route 7 Memorial receives thousands of visitors each year. On November 14th, the anniversary of the disappearance, 19 white roses appear at the monument. No one knows who leaves them, but those who knew Jamie Reese have their suspicions. Some promises are kept forever. If this story affected you the way it affected me, then Ultimate Crime Stories is where you need to be. We dive deep into cases that matter, cases where truth takes decades to emerge, and cases where one person's courage changes everything. Every week, we bring you stories like Route 7, meticulously researched, powerfully told, and impossible to forget. Subscribe to Ultimate Crime Stories right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a case. And if this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think happened in those final moments. Tell us about Jamie's courage. Tell us your theories. We read every single comment, and your insights often lead us to our next investigation. Thank you for watching Ultimate Crime Stories. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface, even if it takes 30 years.